Hi guys, Luton here, welcome back for another episode on Below the Line. Now you've heard the phrase so many times that it's almost becoming a cliche if it isn't already, the easy to learn, hard to master. It's the phrase that gets bandied around mainly with AAA titles that are designed to be presented as inclusive and accessible to all, and it's a phrase which gets trotted out very often by producers and so on who want to make sure that people understand like, hey, there is some skill and detail in this game, but simultaneously it's a pick up and play game. And who would think that that's a bad thing? Well, more and more people apparently, because this everybody gets an award for participating mentality is leading to the ever worsening casualification of games. So today's question for you on Below the Line: when did you feel was the turning point where games went from being something that you had to really work at to feel you represented that community, to now where just turning up is basically all that's required to be part of said communities? Turning up and participating is now the easy to learn part. What used to be general competency is actually the harder to master element. That turning point for me was probably somewhere in the region of like 2014, where Hardline hadn't come out yet, the first Titanfall kind of struggled and was a bit of a mess, Squad was still a year away. The reason I choose 2014 also is because that's the year when Insurgency kind of first arrived, and while not something that would really heavily embed itself, it was an anathema to modern AAA FPS, and after that time we saw in Squad a totally different direction. A direction which this year we have with Postscriptum as well, and whatever the next Battlefield will be, it's not exactly facing off, but certainly you have a similar kind of general consciousness that something needs to change. What games though have really contributed heavily to the casualization of modern games? Tell me that down below as well. Now I'm going to pick out some obvious stuff like Battlefield and COD. They've certainly up there, no doubt, with their ever struggling fight to reign globally dominant with player numbers, Activision and EA battling it off with people's time and money as their weapons. And sorry to utter the phrase, but yeah, Star Wars Battlefront, I kind of feel dirty saying Star Wars Battlefront, but it's the definition of casual and accessible gaming. Let's not let Blizzard off the hook. Overwatch, fun, colourful, hugely accessible to new players, but it's a game that if you want to be even reasonably competent takes a bit more time and practice and understanding, despite what some people might say, and often the people that say that, they're really looking at face value and they're not really looking at the game itself. The scale of the console market has a large part to play here. Publishers and developers alike understanding that many console players are people who want to come home from work, kick back, play a little bit of a game, watch some Netflix, enjoy some pizza with a beer. What's wrong with that? Nothing whatsoever. But it's simply the case that the demographics of gamers have changed greatly over the years. Consoles that used to be the mark of your fairly standard gamer are now just another piece of tech that many people are gonna have. It's also true that gaming used to be regarded as fairly niche and for just antisocial shut-ins. Whilst that stereotype is grossly false, it certainly is how some normies regard gamers even today, and I say this from personal and shared experiences. It was true though that gamers represented not a hugely massive global audience, relatively speaking, up until the advent of things like the PS3 and 360. And when these platforms started to take off, that's when we really saw the modern gaming audience begin to emerge, that fight between the 360, the Xbox stuff and the PlayStation. Publishers and devs would undoubtedly find that your average player is only going to tolerate so much of a learning curve, and what's the best way to bring in the masses? Make your games basically pick up and go. It's the only way to get past a certain point, bringing in a new audience of players and bumping up those quarterly stats. But on the face of it, all of this doesn't seem to be a huge problem. Some people are going to play a little, some people are going to play a lot. Some people like to really get into a game, some don't. The problem starts to happen more over the past 3 years or so, where the now saturation levels of these accessible games begin to fundamentally undermine the core mechanics of many game modes. Multiplayer online gaming rests a lot of the time on the player's shoulders. You need to depend on the players around you to have at least a baseline competency and understanding of what is actually going on around them, because without that, everything that's happening is really just irrelevant, and it becomes then an arena of death with not much else being considered. Enter Battle Royale. BR is this format, and it has essentially been now exploited to its zenith, and probably still more to come, to be honest. It's an open arena where largely anonymous players are going to battle to the victory of one. It's a selfish format. You can be either a potato or an elite gladiator. It matters not because you all get to play. You don't really have a shared focus of any kind like most online games, and with the victory being essentially individual, all of the consequences and barriers of most other formats which rely on people working together fall away. Now I know, obviously I know that that Battle Royale does often have features now where people can actually work together and team up, but I'm talking generally about the format and where it is coming from. It's by and large about the victory of one. The format literally has something for everybody, with little consequences after the fact, beyond ensuring that there is some baseline enjoyment for the potato players, which they usually get at the early stages and maybe survive to the mid game or hide in a corner to the late game. The elite players are going to battle to that end game, where they then get the twitchy, sweaty play that they are craving for. And this is really where we are now in 2018. Many devs are breathlessly this year fighting it out to see who can be first to successfully shoehorn a Battle Royale feature into their games to tap into the unquenchable pool of all. Many are asking, will Battlefield this year learn from the horrible downward spiral that it's been trapped in for the past few games? And that really remains to be seen, whether it's going to make any conscious effort to actually improve the whole sense of the actual multiplayer fundamentals of the game and try to focus people's minds on what it is that they're doing, not just being a constant blob of giant players smashing into each other from two different points. And out of this dystopian nightmare of exploitation comes some shining games like Postscriptum and Squad, indies as well who hark to single player experiences that actually reward and enable vast amounts of replayability. Let's not forget awesome games of past that led the way like Red Orchestra as well. There is some light out there, but it's fading pretty fast, and hopefully we start to see people waking up a little bit more to some of the undermining and short-sighted decisions that are being made. Star Wars Battlefront again. Gamers start to demand that it's not enough that you're just present. One small thing in the scheme of things, but something that I care about quite a lot, is to see an end to players receiving awards or visual rankings based only on time played. Time played is a stat. It's not something you achieve, it's misleading and gives a false sense of achievement. A trained monkey can achieve ranking up or time played rewards. Let's stop rewarding people for gaining experience just off of ambiently being present and start rewarding people more with unlocks and development as players and not just giving them medals for finishing 15th. So again, the question for the day, guys, when did you feel was the turning point for when games went from being something you really had to work at to something where you really felt you were represented in that community? Okay, so now we come to part 2 of Below the Line, and this is where we discuss your comments and thoughts from the previous week's video. And last time we were discussing, are EA DICE going to screw up what I think is a critical Battlefield title for them this year, or is it going to be something else? Have they got it in them to actually make some serious changes, some serious decisions? Mr. Lesson Dave says EA won't change anything drastic, I imagine, because they have a system that works for them. That system is not about to make a good game, but to make a good product. EA doesn't care for critical acclaim, they care about sales. As a society, we are binge consumers. We have to have the most up-to-date product available, and this is why games like Battlefield, Call of Duty and FIFA are churned out like clockwork each year, not because of any actual drive to create a great game, but because their financial strategy is based around having a product to release at a given point. This ultimately means, as with most AAA publishers, that they won't make any drastic changes to their formula until it either fits in with current trends, i.e. Battle Royale, or a significant dip in sales for them to gamble. He says, Luton, in a few of your videos you've pointed out the problems that Battlefield has had with player retention, and while this is a good marker for a game's performance, it's probably not the most important thing to EA, because ultimately a game retaining players is bad for business. Why would they want you to drop £50 on a game, maybe another 50 on a season pass, and then play that game exclusively for a year to 18 months? If you think of this from the dev's point of view, then great, the game has done well, but from the publisher's point of view, that's a period of your time you're content with the game and perhaps not going to be spending money on anything else. Basically what I'm saying is that EA is going to be less concerned with how well a specific game retains its players and will focus more on how they as a company retain players. They won't care if people stop playing Battlefield if those players have moved on to, say, buy the latest FIFA, so there's no real reason for them to change Battlefield in any significant way because it sells. Now, hilariously, my original reply to this comment was so long, I actually realised I could make a completely separate video out of it, because there's no way I can have 10 minutes of me replying to one comment. But look, that just shows how passionate I am about this, and what I would say is just that it's very easy to be cynical, it's very easy to kind of look at a company that's fairly faceless to a degree and say like, yeah, you know, they're only obsessed with money making and that's literally all they care about. And yeah, for sure there's some practices and some decisions which have been quite shady down the line, but at the end of the day what you got to remember is there's a lot of people that are working really hard, there's a lot of people that really do care, and they can't control decisions which get made above them. And whilst of course there's always going to be people who can override you and say, look, I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day I'm in charge and I'm going to tell you what to do, I think that there are some very strong people at DICE and EA DICE, and I think that they are starting to look at which way the wind is blowing, and they're realising we can't just allow things to continue being a random, crazy, just run around casual fest. I think they are starting to see that people do have a need and they do have a want to actually get back to the core elements of what the game is all about and actually see people working together in some kind of strong and constructive sense. Whether or not that's going to happen this year totally remains to be seen, but I do feel more positive about it this year than I have done with previous iterations for a variety of reasons. We'll see what happens further down the line. And with that said, Super comes in with some positivity, saying DICE are incredibly predictable. It's going to be presented really well, garner the biggest amount of hype, regardless of it being in an expansion pack, and regardless of the rest of the game being the usual mundane battlefield. It's going to arrive, die in less than a month because of some dumb shit they did with the map balance or some retarded fucking pickup. You can never get away from this. As always, it's going to be a marketing bonanza, okay? It's going to be a hype fest, it's going to be a trolling clickbait fest, it's going to be a mess, it's going to be a nightmare, it's going to be everything that you hate about commercialism and consumerism. It's going to be like, gotta catch them all, buy, it's going to be all the way, you know? There's no doubt it's going to be unashamed from start to finish. Let's hope, though, that people can kind of read between that and try to let it just kind of wash over you. Try to keep your feet on the ground, try to look at what's actually happening, and the thing is, chances are, if you have even the slightest interest in the title and the game, you're probably going to get it regardless of how shiny and glossy the other stuff is. All of that is designed to bring people into the game who are probably unaware of it or have never experienced it before, and they're trying to make it bombastic and big and exciting so that people are like, oh my god, what is this? I've got to get in, I've got to try it. That's what it's for. It's not for us, it's not for the people who have played the game a million times and are going to get it just to try it. Juro is back for us, and this week with a comment which isn't a thesis. He says, does EA DICE have it in them to take risks and not go with the safe and easy route? Have you been paying attention to history, Luton? Just look at it. The better games from them are the older games, not the newer ones. So no, I don't believe they have it in them to do the smart and player-friendly thing. And why? Because people still buy their games. But I would just reference you to all the stuff I've already said today. Competitive people will buy every single map pack, game mode to stay competitive. I'm not quite sure what competitiveness has to do with buying packs and stuff like that, but even Star Wars BF2 was not going to change till they started losing massive numbers of sales and the government was threatening to step in. If a large number of people didn't flip their shit over the game, it wouldn't have changed, and the only thing to change was loot boxes, not battle royale modes or DLC or map packs, so that stuff is all still fine. Companies now know how far they can push loot boxes, but not how far they can push the other stuff. They're going to keep making map packs because they make money, and people aren't freaking out about it enough for it yet. Same with DLCs, pre-orders, season passes, early access. Most people still throw money at those, so why would they change it? Especially since in a year or so, they're going to have another money-making game on the way with more DLCs and more map packs. Nothing to really pick apart there. I think it's all fairly true statements, but then I think that could all be assumed already. I mean, it hasn't changed for a long time in terms of map packs, season passes, DLCs. There have been more and more people vocally saying that this isn't the way to go and that actually they should try to be, you know, kind of more inclusive in terms of not splitting up the player base, especially when it comes to maps and so on and so on. Are they going to go down that route? I seriously doubt it, because I think they tried that with Star Wars Battlefront. They tried with Star Wars Battlefront 2 to do like giving away all the maps and stuff and then recoup that through loot boxes. They probably figured it was a good trade-off, and at the same time it's probably a nice opening way of headed down that line, but there's nothing to say that they don't just kind of push the loot box situation in a different way with more cosmetic things. I mean, there have been producers for a long time saying that cosmetics are the way to go and cosmetics are what people will want, and it's no problem at all to do tons of loot box stuff and buying stuff with cosmetics. I mean, arguably I don't really care about cosmetics, so it wouldn't affect me, or nothing that I would care about, but I still think that cosmetic loot boxes and that kind of stuff is inherently not a great thing, because ultimately it gets people used to the idea of loot boxes, and you end up having people who have forgotten a time where you didn't have loot boxes. So I actually don't think it's still a good route to go down, even if it's just for cosmetic stuff. With regards to all the other things, you're right, I probably don't think that's going to change, but I will be very, very interested to see whether they word it differently, whether they try to frame it differently, whether they try to basically pull the wool over people's eyes and try to slip it in a more kind of devious way, or whether they're just kind of like, here's our stuff, you know the deal, let's go. Disciple of Sound says, I'm not sure if DICE EA have enough resistance against them to warrant change. They're going to do whatever the majority of the investors, the players, tell them to do, as any profit-seeking business would. Yes, they received heavy backlash, but was it enough? As we saw in Battlefront 2, Obviously not. The company is still acting like a toddler, testing boundaries to see what they can get away with without major consequences, and until they get a proper spanking, aka severe damage to income, they're going to continue to do things like this. Battle Royale will certainly die soon, as nearly all trends do, so maybe they're going to have an effect on their decision. However, only time's going to tell, since they're the only ones who can properly see the money flow either way. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark? What? We'll just have to see what. You lost me at the end, but definitely they were pushing the boundaries with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and trying to see what they could get away with, and I don't buy it for a second that this was some kind of screw-up and that it was just some unintended consequence and they didn't really mean to do it and blah blah blah. Bullshit. They definitely knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to see what they could get away with, and it went tits up. Happily it went bad. I mean, if it hadn't gone bad, can you imagine the situation would be in this year with Battlefield? Oh my god, it would be an absolute complete and total disaster if that hadn't gone bad with Star Wars Battlefront 2. So we shouldn't dismiss how good it was that people really lost it. And I would just highlight and point to the fact that, yet again, some producers and so on who were on board much more, not just in the Battlefield sphere, but in general, people who really are into Star Wars Battlefront, when that whole shit went down with the loot boxes in Battlefront, a lot of those producers were very, very quick to be very apologetic towards EA and DICE. They tried to put it into a nice light. Just go back and watch these videos. They tried to frame it in a good light and, you know, try to make the best of it, even though you kind of tell that they knew it was bullshit. So I would just say there's plenty of people who are really complicit in this kind of stuff, and you got to be really careful with that kind of thing. Craig comes in and says, Luton, I've got premium for BF1. Yeah, you can call me a dumbass, but premium was worth it in BF4, so I invested again in BF1. Unfortunately, the game was incredibly boring after a few hours, and I realised the sniping mechanics of BF3 and 4 we had to have skill, especially BF3, didn't exist. The whole game became a casual experience. I haven't played the last 2 DLCs of BF1 because I just lost interest, and this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of the video today in terms of player attention and what a critical state that Battlefield is in right now. He says, if this was BF3 or 4, I was religiously playing it 24/7, and it's a real shame that Battlefield has gone down the casual experience route of trying to make as much profit for EA. Like I said before, EA base every game profit margin on FIFA, their golden goose. Unfortunately, this isn't reality, and their other games are not as successful. They try and squeeze every penny out of their customers. In FIFA, they use the #1 sport, football, to exploit teenagers with the loot box system in FIFA. Happily, I've never had to deal with really the stuff that goes on in FIFA, but I hear about it a lot from other people. A lot of people are always going on about how bad it is over there, and I'm kind of curious to know. I mean, if anybody wants to drop some details about that down below, I'd just be curious for my own reference. But it's not something I've really experienced at detail, because like I say, I've never really been interested in that football. There are some sports that I'm interested in, but sports have never been like a really massive thing for me. But I do enjoy some sports games, and I have for a long time, and I enjoy watching some sport as well. But one thing I've never really understood with sport is that for the amount of people who go on about like reskins of games and how bad it is to just reskin stuff every year and blah 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 blah, I'm always astonished that within sports people seem completely okay. I mean, I'm sure people bitch and moan about it a little bit, but by and large people seem, you know, there's no resistance to it. People by and large seem very, very on board with buying new team shirts and the updating of things, and the updating of sports games where they ultimately might fiddle around with the mechanics a little bit, but very often they just kind of update the graphics, update the skin. I mean, sports games, I mean, I'm probably being a bit ignorant here, but from what I see, sports games by and large seem to be more often the definition of a reskin. It's kind of like a little graphical update. They might tweak the mechanics around a little bit, but by and large, the core is still there. The core is still the same. Very little actually alters there, because sports are what they are at the end of the day. There's not so much you can change. So I guess it's more understandable. Maybe people just expect it to be that, and therefore they're okay with it. I don't know. Drop your thoughts about that as always down below, guys. Hank comes in and says, I don't think they're going to do anything revolutionary at any level. Even if they delete the paywall, we should be worried in case they screw up like in Battlefront 2. They said that they've learned from that, but who knows if the new idea is going to be even worse. But why I don't believe in the company anymore, that's EA DICE, is because BF1 was a selling success. I feel that they just want to grab the money and go with the next thing, and the Battle Royale thing is going to go in the same direction as BF1 was going, adding things to look like a game with a lot of things that makes us spend the money on that, while the core gameplay, the balance, the game modes like Conquest of that game is being slowly forsaken. This is exactly what I've said repeatedly and what I said at the start of the day. The core elements of the game, the fundamentals of the game are being undermined slowly over time. So I guess they'll try and repeat that selling success. World War II now, when it's popular again with tons of assets they can reuse and so on and so forth, make a lot of money quickly, make the studio focus on the next moneymaker. Battlefront 3? But you see, this really gets to the core of it, and it really does go to what I'm saying, that a lot more people are sort of feeling this, a lot more people are feeling kind of hard done by, they're feeling like they're not getting the experience that they want, and they're getting pissed off. And I think that the company is starting to become aware that it's not enough to just dump a load of maps, the weapons and blah blah blah, and then just go, right, there you go, crack on with it. The jokes that you have about Battlefield being just kind of run around and shooting and da da da, I really think that people have had enough of that. I think people want to get back to the core game modes. The people that have fucked up Battlefield are the people who always would just have the attitude of, I've paid my money, I'm going to do what I want. Fuck those people. Those people have ruined this game because they've basically taken away from the core game mode. They've made it just a running around mess where people just run around with barely any attention to what's going on, and they're focused completely on just engaging and killing the other players. They don't give a shit about the actual objectives. They don't care about any of that stuff. You undermine the core fundamentals of what people are going to be doing, and ultimately what you're left with is a very hollow experience. And that's what people have found. People have more and more and more. What I tend to hear from people is that it's boring, it's a hollow experience, and that's because unlike games like Postscriptum and Squad and even Arma and other stuff like this, in those games you have people working together to actually achieve something. It actually feels like you're getting somewhere and you're achieving something, whereas in Battlefield now what you feel is nothing. It's tedious and boring and a grind, and there's very little you take away from it other than, hey, I had a good round there, I got X kills. Proxel comes in and says, EA DICE are going to change? I doubt it, as we've been asking them for years to do something about the growing casualness of Battlefield, and they've really done nothing effective or really pushed the issue. I, in the past, have actually tried very, very hard to push this issue, and it essentially got me nowhere. We were promised to look at team play and how that could be changed and updated at the end of Battlefield 4. It didn't happen. You know why it didn't happen? Because they pushed out a map pack and guns instead of it. Pissed me off no end. Proxel says, as you've said in the past, LT, Battlefield has the potential to be an amazing FPS. Sometimes I have very tense and engaging games where both teams are really going for the points. The problem is that the game also lets players not do that. In fact, it's very easy for players to get to the top of the scoreboard on operations by sitting in their spawn and sniping. Two things that could potentially fix that are a sniper limit or a class limit. Please, for fuck's sake, do this. Adding things like this to the game would make it more clear the type of game that Battlefield is. At the moment, Battlefield can easily be played without playing the objective and being significantly rewarded. But you can also play the objective. DICE don't seem to be at all bothered about this identity problem for the Battlefield franchise. And I do think that from what I've heard from some people that DICE are a little bit concerned about the identity of their game, but time will tell. I mean, I've been told stuff so many times before and then nothing has come of it, so it'll be very interesting to see whether or not anything comes of it this time around. What I will say is that contrary to what some people would have you believe, Battlefield does have a bit of a reputation now as just a bit of a mishmashed casual fest of people running around and blowing shit up. It just has that attached to it. It doesn't help that the marketing is pretty much solely in that direction, so that's kind of, your visualization of the game, and it doesn't help that the actual game actually does play like that now. They've focused so hard on making it faster, bigger, more explosive, and then couple that with the freedom of just being able to play however you want all the time with very little consequence whatsoever. I mean, really, honestly, think about it. What consequences are there for you for fucking around and just doing nothing or whatever? Very, very little. It's not like when you die that your respawn really makes any difference to you whatsoever. It's not like a real penalty in any sense. It's not like you can't just spawn in at any location at any time, so it takes you time to get back to the action. There's basically no penalty. You can take any class, you can do well with it, you can do shit with it. It doesn't really have a bearing or an impact on anything in a big sense of the word. You can just be completely anonymous and invisible, or you can be there wrecking people. You can have a tank crew. I mean, you can't even believe it. You can't even believe it. But I have played rounds very recently where a tank team is just annihilating the other team. Annihilating them. And the other team, despite this fact, will not switch to play other roles to take that tank down. It is mind-boggling, the low level of player competence in Battlefield now. And you start to see now the kind of thing that I have been predicting for the last few years. People often say to me, Luton, Battlefield was always this way, or Battlefield has always had these problems and it's never going to go away. It's bullshit. There is a lot of factors, and there's a lot of grey areas within this, but it is completely not accurate to say that how the game is now is how the game was like 3 or 4 years ago. It is absolutely not true. And yes, it's true that there were always rounds you would play in Battlefield where things would go kind of crappy, or they wouldn't be dealing with an enemy tank or something like that. That's always true. That always was true. But it's simply the case that the percentage of times where that happens now has become so much worse. It tends to be that instead of having like an odd bad round where you think like, man, fucking hell, what was that all about? You used to think that occasionally, like through an evening when you'd be playing a game. Now, that's nearly all the games. It's really difficult to find gameplay in Battlefield, the most current Battlefield. It's very hard to find gameplay which is actually enjoyable, actually good, something that you feel you can get stuck into. That's the big problem. And it's not just me, a lot of people are saying this. And like I say, what you have to remember, and this is the biggest takeaway, the severity to which the Battlefield community has changed and the way in which the gameplay has deteriorated so badly has not been accurately represented. It hasn't been talked about enough on enough channels, it hasn't had enough social media presence, and so what you end up with is people trying to make the best of things and trying to ride it out because it's in their interest to do that. And what you end up with is a blurred picture of the reality of the game. And the reality is, the gameplay 99% of the time is fucked. Like, you can actually get sort of some enjoyable mechanical gameplay, but from a team sense and from a sense of overall what is happening in the picture there, it's ruined. And unless they make some strong changes, which I am highly dubious they're going to have the bottle to do in this next title, it's going to be still a continuing uphill struggle. But I am very interested to see whether that happens. I'd be curious to see what they can do. But I mean, that's the thing. The only way you're going to make it happen at this point, because they've waited so much time, they've waited so long to actually do anything, that at this point it's going to be very debatable whether or not it can happen at all. Because what they should have done is tried to crack down when things were starting to slip. But now it's gone so far, it's going to be very difficult to know whether they can retain it at all. Fixing some score changes and stuff is not going to be enough. You're going to need to look at spawns, respawn times, class restrictions, weapon restrictions, the way in which you reward people for doing different things in the game, taking out all the stupid dog tag shit, taking out all the challenge shit, and getting back to the core fundamentals of the game. Do I think that they're going to do that in Battlefield 2018? I wouldn't put any money on it. Thanks for watching as always, guys. If you enjoyed the discussion today, please drop a like. Tell me what you thought about today's topic down below in the comments, and I'll see you next time for some more Below the Line.